let's talk about a few weird topics jumbled together. They do make a little bit of sense together, though, I promise. Assumptions, ethics, and piracy. Woohoo! A little bit of computer science knowledge, right? So, yeah, this is the philosophy half of the class. Like, usually every week there's going to be like a philosophy lecture-ish, and then, or a logic lecture, and then a programming lecture. So I'll try to do that Mondays and Wednesdays, all right? So this is a non-programming lecture day. I know it's so sad, but it's still useful, okay? Still part of the stuff I am required to teach you. So let's learn a little bit about arguments and the assumptions that are implicitly hidden in a lot of them, all right? And so I'm going to try and answer this little question for you during this subsection of these slides. If somebody's arguing at me, how do I know if it's a good argument? Right? How do I know if I should believe them or not? Let's try and figure that out. There's a few ways, right? And I'm sure you've argued with people, if nobody else, like your siblings or something, once upon a time. And you kind of know, just deep down, what it means to be a good argument, right? If somebody's wrong, you can't just tell them you're wrong and then walk away, right? That's not a good counter argument, is it? So you have to give an argument to their argument that makes sense and is logical. So that's called a counter argument, okay? And there's a few things that you can like throw at this other person that you're arguing with to tell them that they're wrong. One thing that you can attack in their argument is the assumptions that argument is making, okay? Those of you who are just coming in, make sure to do that attendance. I will stop that eventually. Yeah, so let's talk about the assumptions that an argument might have inside of it, okay? I think we understand what an assumption is, but let's kind of like spell it out just for fun. So an assumption, in an argument at least, is like what is implicitly said as somebody's arguing their thing to you, but is like, it's not explicitly being told. All right, so what are some assumptions in everyday life? Like, for example, if it's my birthday, happy birthday to me or to you, and we go out and we buy a birthday candle for one of us, then you're never going to sue the manufacturer for trying to like light the candle underwater, right, and it not working, right? I think they do make, I think flares, for example, have their own oxygen source, and so I think you can light a flare underwater, but you can't light a birthday candle, all right? So that's an assumption of the manufacturer. They're not going to get mad if I try to use that candle underwater. I'm just dumb if I did that, okay? Likewise, if I like want to go out to eat and I make a dinner reservation, the whole point of having reservations for restaurants is that like they're assuming that I'm going to show up on time and give them lots of money, right? That's the whole point. Otherwise, we wouldn't have those, okay? So that's the assumption that the restaurant's making. And then my most colorful example, let's say that like for some reason, I support a ban on parakeets running for office in the U.S., like in the next election. I don't want any parakeets running for office. And I go out and I stand in like the little circle out there holding a sign up saying, no parakeets, 2024, something like that, right? And so you looking at me may assume a few things, right? You might think, one, that I'm crazy. That might be the most logical thing to assume. Or if you think I'm slightly sane, you might think that parakeets have wronged me in the past. You might be wondering what the backstory is there, right? That's another assumption. So these are the things we do all day long, right, in our heads. We're trying to spell it out now. Or if you think I am fully sane and normal, then there must be a reason I'm holding a sign out there. There must be a way for parakeets to actually run for office, all right? There must be a law that lets that happen. Otherwise, I wouldn't be wasting my time if I were sane, okay? So, yeah, that's kind of the idea. I hope that makes enough sense. Whenever you watch like a TikTok video or something and somebody's like arguing something, think about the assumptions that they're making, but not actually like spitting out to you. I hope that makes sense, all right? Any questions about what it means to be an assumption? I think we get it, right? So yeah, here's a question for you guys. So after you do attendance, please go to the by clicker page, and I'll get that ready. Boop. I'll start it. Please get together with the people sitting next to you, say hi, and I'll have you work on this question about assumptions together. All right, so here's an argument. We're going to figure out the assumptions, the best assumption that this argument is making. All right, so here's one I stole from the internet. Let's say this, it's political again. So Senator Franklin, let's say, is a member of the Orange Party, which supports increased military spending by the federal government. All right, so that's the first bit. And then the main argument is that Franklin will surely vote for a cut in spending on social programs. All right, so that's an argument. Two sentences taken together, arguing something, right? That this will happen for Franklin. What is it assuming? All right, let's say that these 5 options are the only possible options. What is the best one that describes the assumption of this argument? This argument that's being made here in these 2 bullets assumes which of these? See if you can figure out the best one, convince your neighbors, and get an answer in on the bike clicker page, please. All right? Give you a few minutes to talk about that. Yeah, please get next to each other and help each other out. I have to use a different computer than. No. I might have just forgot the patch. On campus, if you want to go find it there. What's the best assumption for that argument? Assume those are the only options under the sun. Today is the 19th. What do we think? Take another minute or so, and we'll come back together. $81.41. Cool. All right. Is that enough time to think about it? We got an answer, and a few of us have at least. Click a button, please. Your best guess, even if you don't get it yet. But I'll give you like 10 more seconds if you want to get an answer in. Let's see what we're thinking. What is the best argument, or the best assumption that underlies this argument? Okay, that's where we're going. I've got too much here. All right. Dun, dun, dun. Let's see what we got. So we're thinking B, maybe A, but the majority of us seem to think B is the answer. And so let's take a look together. So I do think B will be the answer. Yeah. Let's kind of talk about why the other ones don't really do it for us. All right. So can anybody tell me why A is not the answer? Why is it that even if this were true, elected officials always support policies endorsed by their parties? Why does that not really give us firepower to make the argument make sense? Somebody who didn't pick A. Why didn't you pick it?
Where does it indicate that kind of social program is a policy of the Orange Party?
Very good. Yeah, does everybody see that? So let's try and walk through this. So what do we know about Senator Franklin? He's a member of the Orange Party. The Orange Party is all about increased military spending. We know that about the Orange Party. That's Franklin's party, right? Do you see how that says absolutely nothing about this bullet? So if this is true, this is a correct assumption, maybe it is, all that we can conclude from this is that he's going to support increased military spending. We have no clue about what he thinks about social programs. Does that make sense? There's no link. There's no link between the two. So we're looking for a link, really. It's like this is, somehow we need, like, this is bullet 1. It needs to be used as firepower and have bullet point 2 make sense. This doesn't link the two. Do we see that? All right, B is going to be the right answer, so let's talk about C now. C is wrong. Senator Franklin agrees with the policies of his party. This doesn't work again for the same reason as A, right? If we were to assume that this is true, if he agrees with the policies of his party, like, all we know, right, is that he would agree with a bill that would try to increase military spending. We, again, don't have any way to link these two bullets. We know nothing about how he feels about social programs. Yeah? You see that? Cool. So C is off the list. And then D, the Orange Party has the majority in the Senate. That just means that they can get whatever they want passed, right? There's no reason to, like, this argument doesn't really follow from any of that those assumptions in that D bullet, right? Doesn't make any sense. Sure, that just means they can pass whatever they want to pass. We still don't know like why this argument makes sense. Okay, we're trying to link increased military spending to social programs. Kind of. This doesn't really do any of that for us. And then finally, E is actually close to being right, right? Senator Franklin opposed federal spending on social programs. If we were to assume that, then yes, this bullet totally makes sense, right? But if this were the correct assumption, why was this here at all? Do you see that? That's why it's not the best correct answer. E is correct if this wasn't here. Does that make sense? But because we have this first bullet number 1, that talks about military spending, this doesn't really do anything to link those two ideas again, okay? And so it's too weak, all right? Why did you tell me the first thing? Why was that part of your argument at all if that was the assumption you're making, okay? So B is going to be the answer because it's the only thing that's going to link those two ideas. The only way to increase military spending by the federal government is to cut spending on social programs. If that is the correct assumption, and let's assume that we're in a universe where only those 5 are correct options, potential options, then yes, this is the only way to link the two. It's like, all right, finally we have a way to link increased military spending to not spending in some other place, specifically social programs. All right. Are there any questions about how we can conclude that B is the right answer? Happy enough? So yeah, it is a little subtle when you get down into it, but I'm going to make you better at that kind of thing in this class. All right, let's keep on trucking and talk about a topic called ethics. All right, something that we are going to need to understand, especially if we're going to be like an engineer or a scientist. We might be asked to do something by our boss that is unethical, and we want to be able to fight back. All right, so ethics is the study of like how to do the right thing, essentially. And so I've asked you some ethical questions on the first day. You're writing about those in your first essay. Hopefully you've turned that in or you're about to. And yeah, let me give you some other things to talk about if you haven't quite turned in that essay. All right. So like I said, the first day, there is no right answer to like, should I steal to feed my family? There is absolutely no right answer to any ethical question. That's kind of the point. But if that's true, if there are no right answers, then how do I reason about all this stuff? That's confusing, right? Because we're maybe used to getting the right answer always in school. So what I'm going to do in this little subsection is I'm going to give you some ways that people approach ethical questions, all right? Again, I'm not going to give you any answers. These approaches won't give you the right answers. They'll just give you a different way to view the problem, different lenses with which to view each problem, and come up with your own answer after you've thought hard about everything, okay? So, yeah, I'll give you some viewpoints that people use as a little lens to look at problems to see if they're good or ethical or right, okay? And before we get into any of this and we talk about more ethical issues, I do want to say something about the writing assignments that I give you in this class. I'll eventually give you some controversial things to talk about, okay? That's the whole point. That'll be fun for me to read anyway. And when I give you a writing assignment like that on a controversial topic, I'm not expecting you to get any kind of right answer because it'll usually have an ethical question involved and there is no right answer, okay? What I want to do is make sure you can argue well, right? That's what I want to teach you in this class, and we'll talk more and more as we have more lectures about what a good argument means, what it consists of. And yeah, I also want to say that you can completely disagree with me on any controversial topic, right? My opinions don't matter at all as far as your grade in this class is concerned, okay? You can argue the completely exact opposite thing as to what I believe on a certain topic in your essay, and as long as you argue it well and don't make any like logical mistakes or anything, then I'll give you full credit. All right, that's my plan. That is my contract with you. That's my promise. Okay. I'll do my best to not even tell you what I feel like on certain topics so that you can come up with your own ideas. I'll try to give you both sides. Right? I'll try to be as impartial as possible. I'll look at every side of the argument and figure out what is the right answer for us. Okay. But there are some topics, of course, that I feel very strongly on. So apologies in advance if I get heated about it. But we'll deal with that as it comes. Do my best. All right. So yeah, don't worry about pretending to do everything like I do. I know that there's some classes like that where you have to like pretend to be the teacher and think the same things that the teacher thinks in order to get a good grade. That is not true in this class. All right? I want you to argue well, whatever you think. All right, so we're going to talk about ethics. Ethics, again, study of doing the right thing. What is right? What is just? There's a bunch of different viewpoints that people use in the past and these days. Take a philosophy class if you're interested in this stuff, by the way. There's a bunch of different ways that people approach the problems. There's a bunch of different little theories of ethics. The first one we'll talk about is called a deontological theory. It's a fun word that we've probably never heard before. And that has to do with duty. Like the idea of whether this thing is right has to do with the concept of duty, and it's kind of in the word. Like there's a Greek or Latin root stems from duty in there. And so in a deontological ethical theory, then somebody argues that no matter what, the rules are rules. You have to follow all of them always. Always is going to be a key word in the theories we're going to talk about. And then we'll compare and contrast that with a ethical theory called utilitarianism, which maybe you've heard about in like a history class or something. It's a popular idea that a lot of nations were based on. And utilitarianism is when you consider the utility of your actions. Right? It's in the name. How much good can acting this way produce? How much good can acting this other way produce? We want to kind of maximize good or happiness or pleasure, something like that. Okay, so that's utilitarianism. We'll talk about that. And these are the two main theories that we'll use in this class to dissect ethical dilemmas. All right. There are others, of course. Definitely take a philosophy class or even maybe a history class if you want to know more about it. You've probably heard, I know I took like AP US history. We talked a lot about natural rights, if you remember that in that kind of class. That's another idea of an ethical theory. It's like we have these rights just by being humans. That's another ethical theory that we won't talk too much about, but it exists. All right. And so, yeah, I'm going to teach you these two, a couple of these. And again, they're just a lens with which to view the problem. They're not going to give you an answer. Don't take any of the things they say at face value. It's your job to zoom in. And they can all be correct. They can all be wrong. And the ideas of each theory can even be combined. All right? So it's very generic, very sometimes vague. It's up to you to dissect. Okay? And that probably makes no sense at all without an example, so let's have an example. All right, so here is our first ethical theory. It's called Kantianism. All right, it's a deontological theory, and so the word deontology means that rules are rules. You have to always follow them. So in Kantianism, which was invented by Immanuel Kant, this dude, he thought this: a rule is a rule; it should always be followed. And what he believed was that, you should follow that golden rule, right? You should act in a way that you would want others to always act. Never, ever do anything different from that. And you get absolutely no special exceptions for just you. You never get to bend the rules. You have to always follow the rules as you would want everyone else to always follow them. Okay? So I'll give you some examples in just a second. He also tried to frame his idea in terms of this as well, don't treat humans as just a means to an end, treat them as humans with their own wants and needs, don't just use people. And he tried to argue that these two bullets actually meant the same thing. So take a philosophy class if that seems interesting to you. And so Kantianism is a way to look at things and be like, all right, if how would Kant approach this problem? Is that a good way to do it? That's kind of how we're going to think. All right, that's how we're going to use this kind of stuff. Because Kantianism, it does break down. If you read more about it, there's an issue of that no exceptions. You get no special exceptions, and sometimes you need an exception to certain rules. Okay, so that's an issue with Kantianism, and I'll give you an example of that in just a second. Right, so that is an ethical theory, and it's about this: follow that golden rule, act in a way that you would want others to always act. You can think about all the questions that I'm asking you on your essay in terms of Kantianism now. All right. So there are way too many terms about Kantianism. The philosophers got a little crazy about this. So here are all the terms. Here's a dictionary slide for a second. So Kant, his last name was Kant, right? Kantianism was invented by Immanuel Kant. That was his last name. That's the dude. Kantianism is his style of philosophy, his way of thinking about ethical dilemmas. Kantian is an adjective. You can describe an argument as a Kantian argument, right? And a Kantianist is somebody who's a really big fan of Kantianism. Okay, I will use all these words a lot. Now you know them. Okay, now you know how to spell them too on your essays. So here is an example of Kantianism. This is a great example. Let's think about lying in terms of Kantianism, right? Because if you were to ask Kant about, like, should I lie, he would say absolutely not, right? Kant would totally not like anybody to lie ever, because he'd ask this question when he was, like, figuring out how to feel. He'd ask, should everyone always lie? Do I want that? I don't think any of us want that, right? So he would say, all right, that means that nobody should ever lie ever. All right, that's one way to dissect something with Kantianism. So you kind of see how we're using it to see how he would conclude and see how we feel about that. Right? So he'd say no one should ever lie, but it does break down sometimes. There's a fun YouTube video that I watched that told me one way to have this not work out. So for example, let's say that this is my house. So Kantianism is just a way of looking at a problem. It's not going to give you the right answer always. It's going to help you, though, get at the answer that is in your heart somewhere, okay? So let's say that this is my house, and I still live at home. Let's pretend all these things. And let's say that here is a murderer, right? So here I am in the house somewhere, and then here's a murderer, and the murderer knocks on the door, and my mom answers. And the murderer says, because he can't lie, the murderer says, I'm here to kill Lawton, right? I'm here to kill Lawton. Where is he? Where is he? So that's what the murderer asks my mom. This is a weird thought experiment, I know. So now you would, as a parent, I think you could imagine that if I'm in the house right now, as a parent, you would want to lie, yes? So Kantianism is kind of breaking down. This is a perfect world. The world isn't like this, right? This wouldn't be what we wanted to do in this situation. We get no exceptions. So if everybody was a Kantianist, my mom would say, oh, he's in the house. And then the murderer comes and kills me. But you would probably, as a parent, be like, no, he's outside. And you'd want to lie, right? So Kantianism sometimes breaks down. It's not always the right answer. It's just a way of looking at a problem, okay? But technically, there is a way for Kantianism to still be correct in this situation, which is just a funny idea. Like maybe I hear this, I hear my mom lie, and I secretly run out the window before like I hear what she says as an answer, and then secretly I am outside now, and then the murderer comes around and does kill me. So there is a reason. Maybe my mom should have said that I was inside and not lied after all. So yeah, that's Kantianism in a nutshell. You think about you ask the question in terms of always, the word always. Should this always happen to everyone? Should everyone always do this thing? And sometimes the answer is yes, I would want that from everyone, or the answer is no, I would not want that from everyone. But it does, of course, sometimes break down. It's just a way of approaching the problem. Okay. Any questions about that? That's a great question. That's a philosophical question. I really don't know. I'm just a computer scientist. Maybe, since you haven't lied. Technically, that's not lying at that point, right? But then you could ask the question, the ethical question could be like, should I always respond to questions that are asked of me? Probably you would say yes to that, right? Everybody would want to always be answered. Like if you ask a question in class, you'd always want an answer, right? So that could be another ethical dilemma. So that's a great idea. Nice. All right. So again, it's not going to give you the right answer. It's just a way of viewing the problem so that you can get your own right answer, and you can use Kantianism maybe as firepower. Like, all right, this is what Kant would think, and this is why it was right for Kant to think this. That's why people should follow him. All right. The flip side of Kantianism was utilitarianism. Right. It's still an ethical theory that people like to use a lot today. Probably a little bit more popular, but utilitarianism has the word utility almost in the word, and it's all about focusing on the consequences of your actions. Right. What's going to happen after you do this thing? All right. So again, you kind of have a scale. There's like an abstract scale in utilitarianism land, and you're kind of weighing your options, right? You're measuring what you want to do, whether I should do this thing or not do this thing, in terms of like, what's going to happen if I did it? Like, how many will people become more happy or less happy? Will they have more pleasure or less pleasure? Right? That's kind of how you judge whether or not you should do something in utilitarianism. And so the goal of a utilitarian argument, the resolution of an ethical question under utilitarianism, is that you're trying to produce the greatest good for the greatest amount of people, right? That's the key. Greatest good for the greatest number of people. And again, tying back to Kantianism, that means that you aren't special, right? You can, like maybe there's something you want to do that would increase your happiness by a ton, but everybody else's happiness would go down by it a lot, right? If you're like, maybe you got all the money in the world or something, that would make your happiness go up a lot, but everybody else's happiness go down. You are forced under utilitarianism to average everything. You can't just think about yourself and be selfish, okay? So utilitarianism, it's hard to pronounce, produces the greatest good for the greatest number always. You don't get any special exceptions for yourself, just like in Kantianism. And again, utilitarianism has some problems and it breaks down. Because it's really hard sometimes, like the butterfly effect, if you've heard of that. It's hard to determine like what's going to happen if I were to do this thing. What are the exact consequences of me walking left rather than right today, right? It's hard. It's really hard to determine those things, but you got to try your best. And then also, again, the rights of any individual person does not matter at all. You have to average it over the universe, essentially. What's the happiness level of the universe if I do this thing or this thing? Okay, that's kind of how utilitarianism works. And so let's go back to a question that I asked you in your little mini essay. Let's think about it in terms of utilitarianism, right? So if I would ask you, like, would you pull that lever on the train tracks? Would you kill one person to save 50 people? For a utilitarian, the answer is immediate, right? What's the best thing? What produces the greatest good? Well, 50 is bigger than 1. We have to kill the one person. We're saving the 50 for sure. That's what a utilitarian would think, and they would not think any more about it. Does that make sense? Because that's their viewpoint. We're trying to produce the greatest good for the greatest number. It's a no-brainer for a utilitarian to like have blood on their hands, to pull the lever. Because that's going to make things better, right? But again, it kind of breaks down because it's hard to determine consequences and nobody really counts for more than themselves. Because you could ask the question, like, what if that one person on the train track, on the other train track that you're about to kill to save the 50, what if they were like right about to cure cancer or something? Do you see how that flips the scales? Because then like the amount of happiness in the world will go up by so much because you've saved billions of lives over several years, right? So again, looking at a problem under the lens of utilitarianism does not give you the final answer, but it gives you some firepower to use as you're determining your answer for yourself. Okay? Questions about that? Yeah, these are two kind of sometimes opposing viewpoints, Kantianism and utilitarianism. Okay? So yeah, like I said, they're just ways to approach the question. They don't give you an answer, but they help you dissect it, right? And that helps you like start a little mini debate in your mind, and then you can go from there. Okay? Are we good? So I have a silly example. You just saw it. I'm a millennial, so you're gonna allow this from me. But let's look at our ethical viewpoints. Let's use Pokemon as an example. All right, let's talk about the ethics of the Pokemon world. So if you've never played Pokemon before, the idea is that there's a world, right? I'm doing my best to explain Pokemon right now. There's like a world with a bunch of monsters in it, and those monsters you can tame and you can catch them. Those are your Pokemon, and you can have them fight each other, and that levels them up, and that like gives you badges. You can go around to different cities and get better at fighting Pokemon, and like that'll let you move on up in the world. So you can catch Pokemon, have them fight each other, and there's also like a terrorist organization in the Pokemon world that we want to make sure does not like do bad things, that kind of stuff. So that's Pokemon in a nutshell. You have little animals and you let them fight each other. So all right, let's talk about the Pokemon world in terms of Kantianism. What want to be in Pokemon? Let's see. So when we think about Kantianism, we're asking questions in terms of like what do we have to do always? What is our duty? All right, like what are the intentions involved when I'm trying to act? All right. So when you hear Kant, you should always think the word always. This is just a silly example, but hopefully it's colorful enough to have you remember it. All right. So here's a bunch of ethical questions that you might have as you're working your way through the Pokemon world. All right. So you can ask the question like, should we be catching wild Pokemon out in the grass? Should we always be catching them and domesticating them and having them fight each other? Kant would probably say absolutely not, right? He's all for individual rights. Don't use people as a means to an end. I would not want to be like, this is almost slavery in a sense. I would not want to be forced to fight other things. So Kant would say absolutely not. He would take no part in catching Pokemon, essentially. I hope that makes sense. Okay. Though you can usually argue the other thing using the same ethical theory, right? So there's the flip side of that. There's another question that Kant could have asked, right? That you could ask under Kantianism. Like, isn't it true that a Pokemon would have a better life if we always were to domesticate it? Because, like, in our world, right? This is also kind of utilitarianism. In our world, animals live longer in captivity, and so higher level Pokemon that are yours maybe would have a better life. There are little cute Pokemon resorts that the trainers can go to with their Pokemon. That doesn't really happen for Pokemon that are wild. So maybe that's a pro, right? There's a pro-con list that you can think about. And this is kind of also utilitarian at the same time. But what's a con of that? Like, then you've kind of taken them out of their natural habitat, right? They're not as free anymore. But on the flip side of that, like, you're going to get them to a higher level, and so like they're healthier technically than they would have been in the wild. And so this is another thing that Kant would think about, right? Should we always domesticate them? Like, what do we get out of it? What do they get out of it? Would I always want to be healthier? Maybe that is the right answer. So again, you can argue the exact opposite thing using the ethical theory. You can almost always do that, okay? So again, it's not going to give you the right answer. It's going to give you firepower to think about it, all right? Another silly question. The idea is in Pokemon, you want to catch every Pokemon ever, have one of each. So should we always, like, can't we ask this? Should we always be using Pokemon to further our dream of catching them all and becoming the Pokemon master of the realm? And he'd probably say no to that. No, I can't get that to go away. Again, because that's using Pokemon as like a means to an end. He's for individual rights, for sure. Okay, so that's how he would think about that question. But again, you could like ask it of a utilitarian. You could probably also flip this around in a certain way, like I was doing. All right. Should we always be trying to like stop the Team Rocket, which is like the terrorist group of the Pokemon world? You'd ask the question like, yeah, should we always be trying to prevent harmful things from happening to ourselves and to other people? You'd probably say yes. And so maybe that's another argument in favor of like domesticating some Pokemon so that we can use them to fight this Team Rocket. Okay. So again, it's a very silly example. Humor me. But I hope that makes a little bit of sense, right? These are the kinds of things that a Kantianist would respond to these questions. Any questions about that? All right. So again, it's silly, but it's a better way to make you remember. All right. So let's do the same thing from the viewpoint of John Stuart Mill, who was a big proponent of utilitarianism. That was his name. So with utilitarianism, you always want to focus on the consequences of your action. Like what's going to happen, weigh everything. It's really about pros and cons lists for sure with utilitarianism. What happens? What is the average happiness after you do this thing? So John Stuart Mill would ask these kinds of questions when he's trying to determine, like, should I be a Pokemon trainer? He'd ask, like, what do we gain from owning Pokemon? What do they lose as being part of like our family rather than living out in the wild? So again, it's like a pro-con list. Like, all right, if you catch a Pokemon, it's less free now. That decreases the total utility of the universe, technically, right? Maybe. But on the flip side of that, a pro would be like, okay, more Pokemon on our side lets us like rise up as trainers, which gives some prestige to us and to our Pokemon. They get more things, more perks. Maybe they'll be treated better, go to little resorts, stuff like that. So again, there's two sides to that coin. It's your job to weigh the two. Like, which one is heavier, essentially? Which one wins out? Okay, that's how you'd think about Pokemon if you were a utilitarian. All right? And like, all right, should I force Pokemon to fight each other to level up? That's another ethical question that you could ask as a utilitarian. Well, again, you're going to make that pro-con list. Like, what is the average utility if I do this or if I don't do this? All right. So a pro would be, okay, leveling up a Pokemon is probably like training at like at a gym in real life. So maybe that makes them healthier. They'll live longer. But then a con of that is like, is it really a good thing to make them fight each other? Like, there's like plenty of like you get a mental illness probably if you did that, if it's not a physical issue. So that's something to think about, right? So that's how utilitarian might approach the Pokemon world. All right. Any questions about that? So utilitarianism is all about consequences. You see this dude's name, you think utility. All right, and our job is to use these ideas to tackle any ethical question. Okay, and so let's try to bring this back to computer science now. How about we do that? All right. So let's talk about piracy and a fun topic called intellectual property as well. All right. So just a fun little meme, but I'll try and answer these questions for us today. What is some of the history of people pirating things? That's like stealing things, right, on the internet. Why is it still around? Like, why is it so hard to stop piracy still? The internet's been around for a while. Haven't they solved the problem? They haven't. And then also, how do our ethical theories that we just learned about apply to something that's relevant probably to us, to computer science, for sure. We care about that, right? So first, let's talk about a topic called intellectual property, which is the kind of thing that piracy is clashing with, in a sense. All right, so an intellectual property is defined, at least in the U.S., as like somebody's creative work, like their artwork, their music, or whatever. But it's something you cannot touch. All right, so it's weird like that. So it's odd. So like things that you can intellectual property, you can copyright it, you can patent it, you can trademark it, even if it's not real. Right? It's something like music or software. It's something you can hear, like an MP3 file. It's not something that like you can touch. It's inside the computer, right? Software is the same way, like Photoshop or something. People steal that. So like why it's not something that's physical though, which is weird to think about. So it's different, really, right? If it's not a physical thing, like what does it mean to steal that thing, right? Because let's think about it. Should it be treated the same as stealing in real life? And a lot of laws interpret it as such. So maybe that's not the best thing. Because stealing, right? Stealing in real life, we know how stealing works, right? You go to the bank, you rob the bank, and you have a bag of money. The bank no longer has that bag of money, right? That's what stealing means. But if you pirate something on the internet, stealing intellectual property, it's as if you had a bag of money and you copied the bag of money. So now there's two bags of money. Nobody lost anything, but you gained something. That's the difference, right? Is it the same as stealing? That's an ethical question, right? But that's what intellectual property is about. And the meme is like, you wouldn't download a car, and the answer is like, I would if I could, right? So it's different. In my opinion, it's different. And so maybe when you guys become lawyers or something, you can change the laws. So let's talk about how piracy has got to be so prominent these days, right? So back in the day, everybody was like, I want to steal music. That was the main thing that people stole back in the day. And the first main program that people used to steal music was called Napster. Here's a cute little screenshot of a program called Napster that was running on an old version of Mac OS, back when it was still rainbow with the Apple logo. I missed that. So this dude really liked classic rock. So the program called Napster was a way for people to connect to other people on the internet and share what was on their personal hard drive. Like, here's all my files that I got off of my own CDs. You can have them too, right? And then I can search through other people's computers, and they'll show me what they have, and I can download from them, copy from their hard drive to mine, right? So this is called peer-to-peer file sharing. Just people who are running this program, peer-to-peer file sharing. The people who are running the Napster program on their computer are connected to everybody else somehow on this Napster network, right? And so this got sued, of course, because copyright infringement, and it got shut down back in 2001 for a brief stint. It was they somehow rebranded into like a paid service, which was weird. But yeah, it used to be a way to just steal stuff from other people. Or maybe I shouldn't say the word steal. Now we know. There's a little bit of a difference, maybe. So that's like the first major way that people were file sharing and pirating things. Next, after Napster died, there was a program called LimeWire, and this is now something that I remember from my childhood. Like, everybody was using this, and so it looks almost the same to Napster. It's the same concept. It's again peer-to-peer file sharing, where now you have faster internet slightly. That we've gone forward in time, so people are downloading movies as well as music and programs and stuff like that. So again, the idea is that you go on LimeWire and you're just a little piece of the network, but you can connect to other people like this. And there's a way for you to search everybody's computer. Some more powerful computers are like servers almost. It's like you search for something and you're able to talk to everybody on the network, essentially, just by being in the program. Again, copyright infringement, got sued. I forget what country they were based out of, but they got sued and shut down in 2010. And here's a fun anecdote. There was a paid version of LimeWire called LimeWire Pro, guys. It's hilarious what happened. So that cost money, and like it let you download for more people at once. It was like faster or something. And so you could download the free version of LimeWire and search for LimeWire Pro, and then download the Pro version from the free version, and then use that for free, which is hilarious. So they got shut down, but they were pretty popular when I was a kid. And then our ethical question is, of course, like, is this okay? Like, should piracy exist on the internet? Should people be doing this kind of stuff? You can use, like I said, you can use Kantianism and utilitarianism to argue what you want. You can argue either side of that coin, actually. And so let's talk about that. All right, sorry, it's a little small. So let me try to zoom in, maybe. So if you were a Kantianist, you'd be asking about privacy in this way. You'd be like, should you always be able to share content with people? Should you always be able to do that? Especially that content might cost people money otherwise. Like, you have to go buy a CD or something physical otherwise. You have to like use a real service that costs money every month. Should we always be able to do that? Share content with people? And so that's kind of the question that Kant would ask. Always is always key there. Should use always in your question when you're talking about Kantianism. And you could use Kantianism to argue both sides, honestly. Like, yes, you totally should be able to do that, and Kant would agree, because nothing should have ever been copyrighted in the first place. The world would be better if everything was always free, right? Then we don't have to work, we don't have to pay money for things. Like, as a Kantianist, you might argue that. You see how Kantianism would align with that idea? So that's one way to think about it. On the flip side, you could say, like, no, that's not good. That hurts the livelihood of the artists who are trying to make money off of this stuff, off of this music that's being stolen. I just lost money by people pirating things, right? If you were an artist, you would not want to be stolen from, so you could ask that question. Should people always steal? Well, no, I don't want that. If it was me who was being stolen from, so I don't want to do it to anybody else. That's kind of how Kantianism might think as well. So you can argue both sides using the same theory, which is crazy. All right. And then what would Mill think? What would a utilitarian think about piracy? You'd ask the question, like, what makes the most people happy, right? What provides the most utility? What action? Piracy or not piracy, right? So what you have to make a pro and con list again for, should I pirate things? Should everybody always pirate things? So a pro would be like, this is a standard argument for piracy. It's like, all right, people who are pirating things, a lot of them are like children, first of all, or they're in like a country where they don't make a lot of money. A lot of people that pirate things, like let's say it's music, people that are pirating an album, like stealing it off the internet, their utility goes up because now finally they're able to enjoy that artist's music. And they didn't have enough money to pay for it anyway. So nobody lost anything. Okay, so that's a pro. Like, people are getting to hear music that they wouldn't otherwise be able to hear. And then sometimes even another pro is like, all right, maybe they're just pirating it to see if they even like it. And they will support the artist by going to their concert or buying the album after all, if they do end up enjoying everything. Okay, so that's a pro for piracy. That's what a utilitarian might think. That's one side of the scale. What's the other side? And then we have to see which side is heavier. A con for piracy would be like, all right, artists that are like subject to a lot of piracy might lose a lot of money that they otherwise would have earned. Like, some people really could have bought the album, but they chose not to, and they stole it instead, right? And so that might cause that artist to have to go get a day job or something and stop making music. And that would make so many fans of that artist, if they're popular, they'll get really sad, right? And so that decreases total utility, doesn't it, in the world? So that's how you could use both of these ideas to either argue for piracy or against piracy. You see how it's not giving you an answer, but it's giving you a viewpoint. It's giving you a lens into the problem. Yeah? Any questions about that? This is fun. It's fun to think about this, like a thought experiment, all right? So yeah, if we fast forward to present day, the main form, I would say, other than like downloading things on shady websites, it would be BitTorrent, if you've heard of that. That's another peer-to-peer file sharing service, and it's hard to like stop this. It's hard to stop people from sharing files over this BitTorrent protocol. So first of all, it's not centralized at all. Like there's websites where you can go to like download, like start the BitTorrent download process, and those things are getting shut down all the time. But other ones just keep popping up in their place. So there's no real centralization. You're just connecting to other people's computers after all. And then also it's a protocol for file sharing. Just like when you go to the internet, it's like HTTPS:// that's a protocol. Just like that, BitTorrent is another protocol. Just a way of connecting to a computer. There's other protocols, like there's FTP, if you've heard of that, SSH. Those are just different ways of connecting to computers. And so it's just another one of those. You can't really shut it down. And so you can shut down the websites that like show you where these files are, like, that start the process of downloading. But you can't stop them all, right? And then also, BitTorrent is used for file sharing legal things as well. So this is a screenshot of somebody using a BitTorrent client to download a version of a Linux operating system, which is completely free, and like doing it this way takes strain off of that, like that flavor of Linux servers, and so it's actually better off for everybody downloading things over BitTorrent, which is an interesting thing to think about. So you don't want to get rid of it just because people are using it for piracy. You want to keep it around so that people can use it for things that it's meant to be used for legal things as well, right? So yeah, that's kind of where we're at today with file sharing. Maybe you've heard of these terms before. Maybe you've used BitTorrent, potentially legally. So yeah, I think that is what I wanted to say about piracy on the internet, at least, or at least in terms of like software and music and stuff like that. Let me try to switch gears to something that might be even closer to home for a lot of you guys, and then I'll ask you a question about it. I'll have you get into groups and discuss and use our theories. So here's a question that you may have been struggling with in the past, right? Should I as a student download a textbook without paying for that textbook, right? As a college student, this is probably something you thought about at least once. So this is definitely a piracy topic, right? This is a piracy question. And so what I want you to think about, I'll give you a slide to think about it in a second and try it yourself, but like, what are some common arguments for pirating textbooks, for just downloading them off the internet, and against pirating textbooks? What are the assumptions that people are making when they do pirate some textbook versus when they choose not to? Like, what's going on there? I'll ask you about in just a second. And then if you can remember, like, what would Kant say about this? He'd formulate a question with the word always in it, wouldn't he? What would he think? What would Mill say? What would a utilitarian think about downloading textbooks? How would he approach the problem, right? So, yeah, here's my question for you. Dun, dun, dun. I am going to ask you to go to the written ICE page, and I'll clear it out, right? So you can post as a group. I want you to get next to somebody, at least one person. Get next to each other, and please do attendance. I'm going to stop that if you haven't done it already. I'm going to stop that after. But you can type a little post and click submit as a group. Let's see here. Actually, before you get into groups, or as you get into groups, I'd like you to do something. I'm going to give your group a stance. All right, I'm going to have you do a little mini debate with each other, and then you'll write your arguments in this page. So my question for you right now, we'll come back and do more things, but my question for you right now as a group when you get together is, should you download textbooks without paying for them? All right, I'd like you to write some arguments either for or against, and I'm going to force you to have a stance right now. So when you go to the written ICE page as a group, you can like pick a leader or something. If you just click submit on an empty post, it'll give you a group number. So if I click submit right now, it gave me this group number, 41. And so choose a leader, have somebody click submit and get a group number. And based on your group number, if it's odd or even, I'm going to give you what I want you to write about. So if you're an odd numbered group, I want you to say, yes, you should download textbooks without paying for them. And here are a couple reasons why. Come up with at least like 2 or 3 good arguments for, yes, we should do this. If you're an even numbered group, I would like you to answer no, even if that's not what you really believe. I want you to think about the other side. This is a really good exercise, all right? If you're an even numbered group, then you come up with like a few arguments for, no, it's not a good idea to download textbooks, and here's why. Does the question make sense for us? All right, so as a group, somebody pick a leader, click submit on a blank post, get a group number, and then based on your group number, write in a few, at least 2 or 3, arguments for or against this based on the stance I am forcing you to have. All right? So take a few minutes, get into some mini groups, and talk about that. You guys work on that. I'll see if you have more slack on this wire. Not that one. Just one. Just one. Easy, are they? Give you a couple more minutes. You can keep changing stuff and pressing submit. It's not a big deal. Yeah, 2 or 3 is a good number for now. But if you're done with those 2, I do want to say one thing. So assuming you've come up with some good arguments by now, I want you to try to bash down the arguments you've just written. All right? So given what you've just said, try to come up with some counter arguments to your own arguments. Take every bullet point that you said and try to come up with an argument against that thing. Okay? This will be difficult maybe. But it's a really, really good practice. This is you coming up with a way that the other people might think, the opposite group. What would they do? How would you counter those? So yeah, try to counter your own arguments. 2 more arguments against what you were thinking. Minutes. Okay. Sounds like the conversation is dying down a little bit. Let's take a look and see what we've thought. Stop playing with all these wires. Don't know what I wanted to do. All right. So, yeah, let's see. Just click submit as you type more stuff. It should update your response. In theory, unless there's a bug, which there might be. But let's see what we're thinking. Nice. Very, very good. We got some pros and some cons. Very good. So yeah, let's try to read some of these and discuss. Perfect time. So yeah, why would you want to steal a textbook? Like, it's good for money. Everybody gets to look at something, and like knowledge is now free, which is great. Technically, you could buy a digital textbook though, so I don't know if I would buy this one, but that is technically true. You don't need, you're not wasting any paper, because maybe there is only a physical version of the book that you could buy. There is no online version, but somebody like scanned it, and then you can steal that. So that's technically, I guess that works, right? So there's that. What are some cons? Yeah, legal issues. You get sued. Very nice. Yeah, security. You might have download a virus instead of a book, right? And yeah, it might be like a bad scan. It depends. Like, depends on if you feel like undermining the publishing house or not. Very good. So yeah, let's take a look at one more. Let's do group 45. Nice. So this one is, you shouldn't. This is another odd one, I guess. So pro downloading textbooks for free. You shouldn't have to pay. You don't get a choice. Yeah, the government should be subsidizing some things already, right? Maybe that's a good argument for them subsidizing all of our textbooks as well, right? Everybody should be able to get it online for free. The government should pay for everything. That would make sense. Like, that's what taxes should go towards, right? No? Why does this always happen? I don't know. I guess it doesn't happen as often as it does in my other class. But sorry about that. The projector is unhappy sometimes. Alright, back. We're back. Good, so you added a counter argument. Dun dun dun. Tend to be the professor's book. Yeah, sometimes you have to, like, you're paying the professor's salary almost when you're buying their book, which is funny to think about. Nice. So yeah, good arguments, you guys. I hope this was a useful topic, because, like, surely you have a strong opinion on this one way or another. And me forcing you to think the other way, the way that you didn't really think, is really good practice for writing arguments, and you need to use those arguments that you don't like to counter. You need to counter those with your own, essentially. Okay. Any questions about this exercise? We all did attendance. I'm gonna stop that. There it goes. So yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for your words. Those are good ideas. I've written down a few. We've already said some of them though. But here's like my arguments, my ideas for each viewpoint. So let's say that some arguments for could say that, like, why would you want to download a textbook for free? Why would you want to steal one? Well, one reason would be, like, the publisher is, like, charging you $200 for this thing, which no book should be $200. That makes no sense. Okay, that's an argument for piracy. Though the assumption that you're making as you're stealing that book is, like, maybe the publisher has control over the price, and they're the ones extorting me, right? That's why we're mad at them, or we're going to steal the book. But sometimes that's not true. There's a counter argument to that even. Like, sometimes the book is, like, printed at cost. Maybe the publisher gets $1 or something, and, like, that's how much it costs to publish a book with, like, 600 pages in color, $40. Maybe you do want to buy that in that case. All right. An argument against, a good argument against stealing a textbook would be like, we want to reward the authors of that textbook because they did such a good job, or at least that's the assumption, right? I hope that makes sense. That's your assumption as you're trying to buy a book to reward an author, right? The authors did a good job writing that book. But I think we've all at this point in our student careers had a textbook that was just written so badly. It's like so dull or just not fun at all. So maybe that is an incorrect assumption sometimes, right? It's not true when the book is unhelpful, you don't like what the authors did. Maybe that's an argument for stealing it, right? That, and then if we bring this back to our ethical theorists and their theories, let's ask our boys, let's ask Kant and Mill, what would they think? Kant would ask the question, like, with the word always in it, of course. He'd ask, should we always steal textbooks? Is that always a good thing to do? And you could always, I gotta stop saying that word, I guess, but you can totally argue both sides with Kantianism as well as utilitarianism. You can be like, yeah, I think Kant would be on our side for the piracy side. You'd be like, yeah, I think everybody should always be able to steal textbooks because knowledge should be free. I think that is a valid thing and that should always be true, which is totally something that Kant might say. Or you could go the flip side of that and you'd be like, no, we should never steal textbooks because that hurts the authors. That's bad for business. If I were an author, I would not want to be stolen from. That's another way to view the thing, right? And that's still using Kantianism. So again, it's not going to give you the right answer. It's going to give you a lens, all right? That's that. And then a utilitarian would ask something like this, like, is it a good thing to steal textbooks? Yes or no? Pros and cons, right? And so, yeah, what some pros are, yeah, it saves you money. You guys wrote that, right? It increases total utility because, like, we have our money to pay rent now instead of buying silly textbooks. And then also, the stealers of the books vastly outnumber, like, the 2 or 3 authors that made this textbook. It's better to increase the utility of the masses rather than the few. Okay, that's a pro. You could also talk about the flip side of that, and maybe this wins. Who knows? It's your job to weigh the two. But a potential con would be, no, that hurts the authors. They get less money. Maybe they wrote a really good book. They'll never write any more for us because now it's not lucrative for them. That ruins everybody's utility because that was such a good textbook and now it's not being updated or published anymore. something like that, right? So yeah, those are some ideas. Those are some ways of looking at an ethical question. Do you have any questions about any of that? So I think I want to mostly wrap up from here. Any questions about the stuff we talked about today? Ethical ideas. All right, if we're good, I want to talk about your next essay because you got one due. Let's get another one out there. Get slowly but surely closer to that 6,000 word limit that we're forced to write in this class that neither of us have control over. So here's your next essay. It'll be due in 2 weeks, so week 4. That'll be September 3rd, I think. So 2 weeks and a day. Okay, and this is when it is, September 3rd. That's when it'll be due. And it's a silly little essay, but it'll be useful to think about the opposite side of things, right? Just like I was forcing you to do today. So here's your essay. It's going to be a 750-word essay due week 4 during this due date that I gave you here. Keep that in mind. But here is your prompt for this silly essay. 750 words about this. So I want you to argue this. College is completely useless and not worth going to. That's your prompt, right? You have to argue that that is true. All right? You can't say, no, I like college. I'll give you credit. You have to argue that college sucks. That's not worth going to. It's completely useless. Are we all in agreement on that? We understand the assignment. You can't say you like it, all right? You probably disagree with that statement, right? Because you're here after all. To some degree, you disagree with that statement. But I am trying to get you to look at things in the opposite way, all right? Just like I was trying to do a little bit today. So I'm forcing you to argue that prompt. College is useless, not worth going to, even if you disagree. You can't say you disagree. I will give you a 0. Okay? Any questions about that? It's a little weird, I know, but this is really, really good practice. All right? You don't have any hard and fast rules after that other than one thing. All right? You can structure the essay however you want. Please use paragraphs and normal essay things like that. You don't have to cite any sources right now, but you could if you wanted to. I'll force citations upon you later, but not for this essay. I just kind of want to hear your thoughts. The one thing you must do in addition to arguing this prompt is you have to talk about Kantianism and utilitarianism, both. You have to talk about the Kantianism viewpoint to this question, how a Kantianist might think about this question, how they would resolve the ethical dilemma, and then also how a utilitarian might answer this question as well. You have to talk about both sides, both viewpoints, and explain why. Don't just say like, oh yeah, Kantianism would agree that college is useless, period. That's not an argument, right? I don't believe that you understand Kantianism, right? You have to tell me that you're picking up the stuff we're talking about in class. You have to explain why Kant and Mill would say those things, why a Kantianist would take that viewpoint. Link it back, okay? And you could use that to argue for or against whatever you're trying to say. So, for example, let's say that Kantianism, whatever Kantianism you say says, if that agrees with your argument that college is useless, then like use that as proof. Like, all right, Kant would say this, and this is why, and this is great because it feeds into my idea here, feeds into my thesis. Or if like Kantianism says, no, college is great, we should always go to college, and that's what you think Kantianism is saying, and you've argued that, and you say why, and that's not agreeing with what you're trying to say here, then you better counter it. Discuss why your argument is still correct in spite of what Kantianism might say. All right? So you got to include both viewpoints, even if they don't disagree, even if they disagree with what you're trying to say, and counter them in that case, or use them as firepower if they agree with you. Right? So that's pretty much the essay. Argue this. You have to talk about Kantianism and utilitarianism somewhere. Okay? Any questions about that? I think that's everything I wanted to say. So as far as style goes, I won't talk about citations now because we'll deal with that later. But you can turn this in however you want, but it's got to be a PDF. All right? So make it however you want. There's a fun programming language that lets you write essays as you're programming it. It's called LaTeX. If you want to learn that, but just you can do it in Word. Doesn't really matter. But the one thing, oh yeah, as far as style goes, there's one other style rule. This is a formal essay that you're writing after all, so I will from now on mark you down if you use any informal writing. That includes like using contractions, stuff like that. So keep it formal, please. We want to sound educated, okay? So yeah, I think that's everything I want to say. 750 words at a minimum, and I think that's it. That'll be due in 2 weeks. Good. All right, so that's your essay. And I think that's where I want to end the class. I have a fun little exercise if you want to do this at home. It's some fun trolley problems, and there's some animations, and it just gets like wilder and wilder as you try more possibilities. So I encourage you to try that yourself. But we only got 2 minutes left, so you can do that at home.